Jake Morrison floated in the command chair of his ship and stared at the scanner readings. Something was wrong with the numbers. His ship USS Horizon had been mapping empty space for 3 weeks, but now the sensors showed a massive object ahead. The object was bigger than most moons and made of some kind of crystal that reflected starlight in strange ways. Jake had been exploring the outer edges of known space for 15 years. He knew what belonged out here and what did not. This thing definitely did not belong. His crew of 5 aliens from different worlds worked at their stations. The Zentari navigation officer Crix made clicking sounds that meant confusion. The 2 health and engineers, Voss and Nara, spoke in their musical language about power readings that made no sense. Dr. Peln, the Morgari medical officer, kept checking his instruments as if they were broken. "Captain Morrison," said Crix in his translated voice, "the object appears to be artificial but very old, older than our civilization. Older than most star charts." Jake ordered the ship to move closer. As they approached the crystal structure, he could see it was not solid. There were openings and passages that led deep inside. The whole thing pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed to come from its center. His crew became more nervous as they got closer. "Sir," called Voss from the engineering station, "I am reading strange energy patterns. They are not like anything in our databases. The patterns seem to be weakening as if the power source is failing." Jake made the decision to take the ship inside one of the larger openings. The Horizon was small enough to fit, and his crew was experienced with unknown technology. As they entered the structure, the walls around them showed signs of incredible age. The crystal formations had grown into complex patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Deep inside the structure, they found what looked like a central chamber. In the middle of this chamber was something that made Jake's blood run cold. A being hung suspended in a field of crackling energy. The being was humanoid, but wrong in every way that mattered. It was 3 times the height of a human, and its skin was black as deep space. Where its eyes should be were 2 points of red light that seemed to look right through the ship's hull. "What is that thing?" whispered Dr. Peln. But before anyone could answer, the ship's computer began speaking in an ancient language none of them recognized. Then the translation systems kicked in and the voice became clear. "Warning, warning, containment failing. Entity designation. Vorthak the Eternal shows signs of awakening. All sentient beings must evacuate this sector immediately. Containment failure estimated in 180 standard days." Jake felt his crew members beginning to panic. Crix started making high-pitched noises. Voss and Nara held on to each other and spoke rapidly. Dr. Peln's readings showed that his heart rate was climbing to dangerous levels. But Jake himself felt different. Where his crew was feeling fear, he felt only a cold determination. The computer continued its warning. Entity Vorthak ruled over 1,000 star systems before containment 3.2 million years ago. Psychic emanations from entity cause madness and death in most sentient species. Coalition of 12 species required total sacrifice of 6 billion individuals to achieve containment. As the computer spoke, Jake watched his crew getting worse. Crix fell from his chair and began making sounds like a wounded animal. The health and engineers started seeing things that were not there and reaching for invisible enemies. Dr. Peln collapsed and went into some kind of trance state with his eyes rolled back. Jake realized he was the only one still thinking clearly. Something about being human was protecting him from whatever was affecting the others. He checked the ship's systems and found that the communications array was not working properly. The energy from the prison was blocking all signals to the outside galaxy. He tried to wake his crew, but they were lost in their own minds. Crix kept repeating words in his own language that the translator said meant the dark between stars. The health and engineers had stopped moving entirely and stared at the walls with expressions of pure terror. Dr. Peln was breathing, but showed no response to anything Jake did. Jake was alone with a ship full of unconscious aliens and a being that had once ruled 1,000 worlds, was about to break free from its prison. The computer had said 6 months until the containment failed completely. He had to get word to the Galactic Federation, but his communications were jammed. The nearest Federation outpost was 2 months away at maximum speed, and he could not leave his crew. As he sat in the command chair trying to figure out what to do, Jake felt something touch his mind. It was like ice water flowing through his thoughts. A voice spoke inside his head with the weight of eons behind it. Interesting. A species I do not recognize. You resist my influence, little creature. How amusing. I have been asleep so long, and now I wake to find new playthings in my galaxy. Jake tried to ignore the voice in his head, but it would not go away. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of dead worlds and burning stars. The being called Vorthak was speaking to him through dreams and visions that felt more real than the ship around him. His crew remained unconscious. Jake had moved them to the medical bay where Dr. Peln's equipment kept them alive but could not wake them up. Their minds were trapped in whatever nightmares Vorthak was sending them. Jake was the only one still fighting against the mental intrusion. You interest me, human, the voice said during what should have been sleep time. Your species is unknown to me. When I ruled this galaxy, there were no humans among my subjects. Tell me about your people. Jake tried not to respond, but found himself thinking about Earth and humanity despite his efforts to resist. Vorthak absorbed these thoughts and seemed amused by what it learned. Ah, a young species. You have barely left your birth world, and already you travel between the stars? How quickly you grow, but you are still so small and weak compared to what you will become under my guidance. Through their forced mental connection, Vorthak began showing Jake images of its former empire. Worlds covered in crystal cities where millions of beings worked to serve their god-emperor. Space fleets that stretched from star to star carrying tribute and slaves. Entire species that had been changed and improved to better serve Vorthak's needs. I ruled for 10 million years, Vorthak explained with pride in its mental voice. My empire covered this entire spiral arm of the galaxy. Every thinking being from the core worlds to the rim territories knew my name and obeyed my will. I brought order to chaos and purpose to meaningless existence. Jake saw through Vorthak's memories how the empire had really worked. The being fed on the life force and consciousness of other species. It would drain entire populations to maintain its own immortality and power. What Vorthak called bringing order was really systematic murder on a scale that Jake could barely understand. The coalition that defeated me was desperate and foolish, Vorthak continued. They sacrificed their greatest heroes and most powerful weapons to build this prison. 6 billion beings gave their lives to create the energy fields that have held me for so long. But they only delayed the inevitable. Soon I will be free, and my empire will rise again. Jake learned that Vorthak was not truly immortal, but sustained itself by consuming other minds and souls. The more it consumed, the stronger it became. By the time the ancient coalition had moved against it, Vorthak had grown so powerful that normal weapons could not hurt it. Only the combined sacrifice of entire species had been enough to trap it. But Vorthak made a mistake in its arrogance. As it boasted about its power and plans, it revealed information that Jake could use. The being told him about its homeworld in a pocket dimension where the source of its power was hidden. A crystalline spire that contained the stored life force of billions of victims. My homeworld exists outside normal space, Vorthak explained. Even if these primitive coalition species had known about it, they could never have reached it. The defenses I placed there would destroy any fleet long before they approached the dimensional barrier. Jake realized that this was his chance. If he could somehow reach that homeworld and destroy the power source, he might be able to weaken Vorthak. Enough for others to finish it. But the being was still talking, and Jake had to listen without showing his new plan. When I break free in 5 months, I will begin where I left off. This galaxy has grown chaotic without my rule. New species have appeared, and old ones have forgotten their place. I will remind them of the natural order with my servants leading my armies across every inhabited world. Vorthak showed Jake visions of what it planned for humanity. Humans would be perfect as soldiers and workers because of their resistance to psychic control. The being intended to capture Earth and use human minds to create a new officer class for its rebuilt empire. Your species will serve me well, Vorthak said with satisfaction. I will grant humans positions of authority over the other species as reward for your unique gifts. You should feel honored that I have chosen your people for such an important role in my return to power. Jake felt sick at the images Vorthak was forcing into his mind. Human cities transformed into crystal fortresses, human children being trained as psychic weapons, human adults being changed into something that was no longer recognizably human but served Vorthak without question. Over the following weeks, Jake pretended to be gradually accepting Vorthak's influence while secretly working to repair his ship's long-range communications. The being seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to after millions of years of imprisonment and became careless about what information it shared. Jake learned about the dangerous regions of space surrounding Vorthak's homeworld, ancient defense systems that still functioned after millions of years, automated weapons that could destroy entire fleets, reality distortion fields that drove navigators insane, the Crimson Nebula where space itself had been twisted into impossible shapes. No single ship could make such a journey, Vorthak assured him. The defenses were designed to stop the combined fleets of a dozen species. One small vessel like yours would be destroyed before it traveled halfway to my domain. But Jake was already making plans. His ship was small and fast. He had spent years mapping dangerous regions of space and knew how to avoid detection. Most importantly, he was human, and humans had proven they could survive things that killed other species. Jake finally managed to get the communications working, but found that Vorthak's influence was still blocking his signals. The being was allowing him to repair the ship because it found Jake's determination amusing. Vorthak was so confident in its superiority that it saw no threat in one human with a damaged ship. Go ahead, little human, Vorthak said when it sensed Jake's growing plans. Try to reach my homeworld. Try to stop me. Your failure will be entertaining during these last months of my imprisonment. When you die screaming in the void, I will add your memories to my collection. Jake left his unconscious crew in medical pods that would keep them alive until help arrived. He set the ship's computer to broadcast a distress signal on repeat once he was far enough away from Vorthak's interference. Then he turned the USS Horizon toward the dead zones of space where no sane pilot would travel. The first obstacle was a field of reality mines left over from Vorthak's empire. These weapons had been floating in space for millions of years, waiting for targets. When a ship came too close, the mines would tear holes in space itself and drag anything nearby into dimensions where the laws of physics worked differently. Jake had to pilot manually because the ship's navigation computer could not plot safe courses through impossible space. He watched his instruments carefully and trusted his instincts when the readings made no sense. 3 times he had to reverse course when the space ahead began folding in on itself. Twice he barely escaped when mines activated and tried to pull his ship into twisted pockets of reality. After the minefield came the screaming sector, where Vorthak's former servants had died by the millions. Their psychic death cries had been trapped in the local space and still echoed after all this time. Most species would go insane listening to the sounds of that much suffering, but Jake gritted his teeth and pushed through. The voices tried to tell him about the horrible things that had happened to them, but he forced himself to ignore the words and focus on flying. His ship began showing signs of damage from traveling through regions where space was not stable. The hull developed stress fractures that Jake had to seal with emergency foam. The engines started making noises that were not in any maintenance manual. The life support systems worked harder to filter out exotic radiation that turned the air. Strange colors. In the Forgotten Nebula, Jake encountered the first survivors. A small ship appeared on his sensors and tried to run when it detected the horizon approaching. Jake managed to get close enough to establish communication with the pilot. The being called itself Kelm and belonged to a species Jake had never heard of. "You must turn back," Kelm warned him through the communication link. "The dead zones are not for the living. We who hide here learned long ago not to venture into inhabited space. The fear follows us wherever we go." Jake explained his mission and asked for help reaching Vorthak's homeworld. Kelm's ship went silent for a long time before the alien responded. "You speak of the Eternal One. We are the children of those who escaped its hunger. Our ancestors fled here when the great empire fell. For 3 million years, we have hidden in the places where normal space ends. Why do you seek the forbidden realm?" When Jake told Kelm about the failing prison, the alien made sounds that the translator said meant terror and despair. But then, Kelm did something unexpected. The alien ship came alongside the horizon and transferred data files about the deep, dead zones. "If you truly mean to challenge the Eternal One, then you will need these star charts. They show the safe paths through the Crimson Nebula where space bends back on itself. Many of our people died mapping those routes. Use them wisely, human. Your species' name is new to us, but you have the courage of the old heroes." Kelm also warned Jake about the time limit. Vorthak's homeworld existed in a pocket dimension that could only be reached during specific cosmic alignments. The next alignment would happen in 3 weeks. If Jake missed it, he would have to wait 1,000 years for another chance. The journey became more dangerous as Jake traveled deeper into regions that had been twisted by ancient weapons. He passed through a system where the planets orbited in impossible patterns that hurt his eyes to watch. He flew around a star that burned with black fire and gave off light that made electronics malfunction. The horizon was falling apart around him. Jake had to shut down non-essential systems to keep the engines running. The ship's AI began glitching and saying random things in languages from dead civilizations. Jake switched to manual control for everything and relied on his own skills to navigate through space that obeyed different rules. In the Shattered Zone, he found more survivors who tried to help him. A group of crystal beings who lived in the wreckage of their homeworld gave him supplies. A machine intelligence that had been hiding in an asteroid field updated his star charts with current information about the hazards ahead. "The Crimson Nebula has grown since we last mapped it," the machine told him. "The distortion field now covers 12 star systems instead of 8. The time passages inside move at different speeds. What seems like hours to you might be days in normal space, or the reverse." As Jake approached the final barrier protecting Vorthak's domain, his ship was barely functioning. The hull was held together with patches and prayer. The engines ran on backup power from the life support systems. The navigation computer had failed completely and Jake was flying by instinct and luck. The Crimson Nebula stretched across space, like a wound in reality. Inside the red clouds, Jake could see stars that moved in spirals and planets that existed in several places at the same time. Ships that had tried to enter the nebula over the millennia floated as frozen debris with their crews still alive but unable to move or speak. Jake checked his instruments one last time and saw that the cosmic alignment was beginning. Somewhere in the nebula's center, a gateway was opening to Vorthak's pocket dimension. He had one chance to find it before the alignment ended and the way closed for another 1,000 years. The horizon plunged into the Crimson Nebula, and immediately, Jake felt reality shifting around him. The ship's interior became larger and smaller at the same time. Colors that had no names painted the walls. His reflection in the monitor screens showed him as a child and an old man and something that was not human at all. But Jake kept flying toward the center where his instrument said the dimensional gateway waited. Jake found the dimensional gateway just as the cosmic alignment reached its peak. The opening appeared as a tear in space that showed glimpses of another universe beyond. His ship, USS Horizon, barely held together as it passed through the barrier between dimensions and emerged in Vorthak's hidden realm. The pocket dimension contained a single world that defied every law of physics Jake knew. The planet existed in perpetual twilight, with a sky that showed no stars or sun. Purple clouds drifted overhead while the ground below was covered in structures that hurt to look at directly. Buildings grew like living things and changed shape when Jake was not watching them. At the center of this impossible world stood a crystalline spire that stretched from deep underground to high above the atmosphere. The structure pulsed with collected life force from billions of beings who had died to feed Vorthak's power. Their trapped souls created lights that moved through the crystal like fish swimming in dark water. Jake's ship was detected immediately by the defenses Vorthak had left behind. Constructs made from the essence of the entity's most powerful victims rose from the twisted landscape to attack the horizon. These beings had once been heroes and champions of their species, but now they served as guardians of their destroyers' power source. The first construct looked like it had been a warrior from some proud alien race. It moved through the air without wings and struck the ship with weapons that fired pure hatred. Jake tried to return fire, but his ship's systems were too damaged to fight effectively. The Horizon's hull began to crack under the assault. "You should not have come here human," the construct spoke with a voice full of ancient sadness. "I was once called Valdris the Bold, and I led armies against the Eternal One. Now I am bound to serve the very being I died fighting. Turn back before you share my fate." But Jake could not turn back even if he wanted to. The dimensional gateway had closed behind him and would not open again for hours. His ship was dying around him, and more constructs were rising from the planet's surface. He made the only choice available and aimed the Horizon at the crystal spire in a desperate crash landing. The ship broke apart as it hit the planet's surface. Jake barely made it to an escape pod before the main hull exploded. The pod's parachutes deployed and brought him down hard on ground that felt soft and wrong under his boots. He grabbed his emergency kit and started running toward the spire while constructs circled overhead like deadly birds. The landscape around him shifted and changed as he ran. What looked like solid ground became swamps that tried to pull him down. Hills moved to block his path while valleys opened to swallow him. But Jake had trained for hostile environments and used his human adaptability to navigate terrain that would have confused other species. The constructs followed him but seemed reluctant to attack directly. As Jake got closer to them, he could see that they retained memories of who they had been before Vorthak captured their souls. A being that looked like a giant insect spoke to him in a clicking language that his translator recognized. "I was Hive. Queen Zestrix and I ruled 40 worlds before the Eternal One came to my space. My children fought bravely, but we could not stop the hunger that devours everything. Do not try to reach the spire human. The defenses there will do worse things to you than simple death." Another construct appeared in front of Jake. This one had been some kind of energy being, and now flickered between different forms as it spoke. "I am what remains of the light-bearer Ashron. I commanded fleets of pure thought against the darkness, but even we could not stand against such ancient evil. The spire contains not just power, but the screaming souls of all who fell. You cannot face what waits at its heart." Jake understood that these beings were trying to protect him from suffering their fate, but he also knew that if he failed, then Vorthak would break free and consume the entire galaxy. He had to reach the spire no matter what the cost. The closer he got to the crystal structure, the more he could hear the voices trapped inside. Billions of beings from thousands of species all crying out in eternal torment. Their life force had been stolen to fuel Vorthak's godlike power, but their consciousness remained aware and suffering. The sound would have driven most people insane, but Jake forced himself to keep moving. At the base of the spire, he found an entrance that led into chambers filled with horrors beyond description. The walls were lined with crystallized screams that showed the final moments of entire civilizations. Corridors stretched in directions that should not exist, while rooms contained the preserved consciousness of heroes who had tried and failed. To stop Vorthak, Jake made his way deeper into the structure using demolition charges from his emergency kit to blast through barriers. The Spire fought back by showing him visions of what would happen if he succeeded. The destruction of Vorthak's power source would release all the trapped energy at once and tear apart the pocket dimension. Jake would die in the explosion, but hopefully weaken Vorthak enough for others to finish the job. As he climbed through the Spire's interior, Jake began to understand the true scope of what Vorthak had done. This was not just a weapon or power source, but a monument to suffering on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The entity had not just killed its enemies, but trapped their souls to experience eternal torment while their life force fed its hunger for immortality. At the Spire's heart, Jake found a chamber that contained a pulsing mass of darkness. This was what remained of a star that Vorthak had consumed to create its homeworld. The stellar core had been twisted into something that existed outside normal physics and served as the ultimate battery for the entity's power. Jake placed his remaining explosives around the chamber and set the timer for 10 minutes. That would give him time to reach a safe distance if such a thing was possible in this twisted realm. But as he turned to leave, he found his path blocked by something that made his blood freeze. Vorthak itself had projected an avatar to its homeworld to stop him personally. Vorthak's avatar materialized in the chamber like a nightmare given form. The being stood 3 times taller than Jake, with skin that seemed to absorb light and eyes that burned with the hatred of eons. When it spoke, the walls around them cracked, and the air itself seemed to scream. Impressive human. I did not think any single being could reach this place. Your species continues to surprise me with your stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. But your journey ends here. Jake checked his timer, 8 minutes until the explosives detonated. He had to keep Vorthak's avatar busy long enough for the charges to destroy the corrupted star core. The entity seemed to read his thoughts and laughed with a sound like breaking glass. You think those primitive chemical explosives can harm the heart of my power? I have consumed the life force of entire star systems. I have devoured the dreams of 1 billion species. Your small weapons are nothing against forces that shaped galaxies. But Jake noticed something important. Vorthak was talking instead of simply destroying him immediately. The entity's arrogance was its weakness. After millions of years of being worshipped and feared, it could not resist explaining how superior it was to this small human who had somehow reached its most sacred place. Do you know what this chamber contains, human? This is the compressed essence of the star that birthed my homeworld. I consumed its nuclear fire and transformed it into something far greater. Every photon of light that once warmed 12 worlds now serves my will. Every fusion reaction that took millions of years to complete feeds my immortality. Jake pulled out his sidearm and fired at the avatar. The energy bolts passed right through Vorthak's form without causing any damage. The entity laughed again and gestured at Jake with contempt. Physical weapons cannot touch me here. I am not truly present in this dimension. What you see is merely a projection of my consciousness sent from my prison to deal with your insignificant threat. When I am free, I will visit your Earth personally and show your species what real power looks like. 7 minutes remaining. Jake had to find a way to keep the entity distracted. He started moving around the chamber looking for anything he could use as a weapon, while Vorthak continued its monologue. I will transform your homeworld into a paradise of service. Humans will become my new warrior caste thanks to your resistance to mental domination. Your children will be raised in crystal cities built from the bones of your enemies. Your leaders will bow before thrones made from compressed starlight. As Vorthak spoke, Jake noticed that the avatar became more solid when the entity was angry or excited. Strong emotions seemed to make the projection more vulnerable to physical attacks. Jake decided to try a different approach. "Your empire fell once before," Jake said while backing toward a wall covered in trapped souls. 12 species working together were able to defeat you. If it happened once, it can happen again. The avatar's eyes flared brighter, and its form became more defined. Those primitive species caught me by surprise. I had grown complacent after 10 million years of unopposed rule. They used weapons powered by the voluntary sacrifice of their greatest heroes. 6 billion beings gave their lives to create the energy matrix that became my prison. 6 minutes left. Jake could see that mentioning Vorthak's defeat was making the avatar more solid and angry. He pressed the advantage. They beat you because you underestimated them, just like you are underestimating humanity now. You think you know everything. But a single human reached your homeworld when you said it was impossible. Vorthak roared with rage, and the chamber walls began to bleed. The avatar became almost completely solid, as the entity's fury gave it physical presence in the pocket dimension. "I am eternal. I am inevitable. I am the darkness between stars and the hunger that devours light itself. Your species will learn to worship me as all others have, or you will join the chorus of screaming souls that powers my ascension." 5 minutes remaining. The avatar was now solid enough that Jake's weapons might hurt it. But Vorthak had also become more dangerous. Energy crackled around the entity's hands as it prepared to attack Jake directly. "You want to know what I will do to humanity?" Vorthak snarled while advancing on Jake. "I will show you the fate of every species that defied me." The avatar touched Jake's forehead, and suddenly his mind was filled with visions of what Vorthak had done to its enemies. Entire worlds stripped of life while their populations watched helplessly. Children turned into weapons against their own parents. Heroes forced to serve the very evil they had died fighting. But Jake had seen horrors during his journey through the dead zones. His human mind was tougher than Vorthak expected. Instead of breaking under the mental assault Jake managed to grab one of his explosive charges and press it against the avatar's chest. "This is for everyone you murdered," Jake said, and triggered the charge manually. The explosion blasted both Jake and the avatar across the chamber. Jake felt his ribs crack and his vision blur, but he was still alive. Vorthak's projection flickered and became less solid as the entity struggled to maintain its presence after taking physical damage. 4 minutes until the main charges detonated. The avatar was wounded but not destroyed. It pulled itself upright and glared at Jake with eyes like dying stars. "You cannot win, human. Even if you destroy this power source, I will still be free when my prison fails. I will be weakened but not defeated. It will take me longer to rebuild my empire, but I have all the time in the universe." 3 minutes left. Jake realized that Vorthak was right. Destroying the spire would weaken the entity, but not kill it. But weakening it might be enough for the other species of the galaxy to have a fighting chance. "Maybe I cannot kill you," Jake said while struggling to stand. "But I can make sure you never again have the power to casually destroy entire civilizations. The galaxy will be ready for you this time." 2 minutes remaining. The avatar made one final desperate attack. Vorthak's avatar lunged at Jake with claws that could tear through reality itself. Jake rolled aside as the entity struck the chamber wall and left deep gouges in the crystallized souls. 1 minute remained until the explosives detonated. Jake knew he would not survive the blast, but he had accomplished his mission. "You have doomed yourself for nothing human." Vorthak snarled as its avatar began to fade. "When I break free, I will find your Earth and make your species suffer for 1,000 generations. Every human child will be born into slavery. Every human dream will become a nightmare." But Jake was no longer listening to the entity's threats. He was thinking about his crew back on the USS Horizon and hoping they would survive long enough for rescue to arrive. He thought about Earth and the billions of humans who had no idea that their survival had depended on one man's desperate mission to a place that should not exist. The timer reached 0, and Jake's world exploded into light. The destruction of Vorthak's power source released 3 million years of stored life force in a single instant. The corrupted star core detonated with the fury of a supernova, while the crystalline spire shattered and freed the trapped souls of billions of beings. The pocket dimension began tearing itself apart as fundamental forces that had been held in artificial balance suddenly broke free. Jake died in the first microsecond of the explosion, but his sacrifice triggered something that Vorthak had never expected. The released energy did not simply dissipate into space. Instead, it formed a psychic shockwave that traveled faster than light and punched through dimensional barriers to reach across the galaxy. The shockwave struck Vorthak's prison just as the ancient containment systems finally failed completely, but instead of emerging at full power, the entity found itself crippled and vulnerable. Without its homeworld power source, Vorthak was reduced to a fraction of its former strength. For the first time in millions of years, the self-proclaimed god felt something it had forgotten existed: fear. The psychic shockwave carried more than just destructive energy. Embedded within it was Jake's final message broadcast through the quantum foam itself. His warning reached every inhabited world in the galaxy, along with fragments of his memories showing his journey and sacrifice. Species that had never heard of humans before suddenly knew everything about the man who had given his life to save them. They saw through Jake's eyes as he discovered the failing prison. They felt his determination as he traveled through regions of space that killed other explorers. They experienced his final battle against an entity that had once ruled over 1,000 star systems. The message reached the Galactic Federation first, since they had the most advanced communication networks. Emergency sessions were called on every major world as leaders tried to understand what they had just witnessed. A previously unknown species called humans had produced a hero who single-handedly weakened the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Admiral Kess of the Zentari fleet was among the first to respond. She had lost 3 ships to the dead zones during mapping missions and knew how dangerous that region of space could be. The idea that one human in a damaged ship had crossed the entire dead zone and reached Vorthak's homeworld seemed impossible. This, Human Morrison has done something that our greatest heroes could not accomplish, Admiral Kess told the Emergency Council. He has given us a chance to finish what the ancient coalition started. We cannot waste his sacrifice. Dr. Velen, the Morgari scientist, had studied the old records about Vorthak's first defeat. She knew that even in its weakened state, the entity remained incredibly dangerous, but she also knew that it could now be fought with conventional weapons. The calculations are clear, Dr. Velen reported to the Council. Without its power source, Vorthak can no longer regenerate from any damage we inflict. It will still take massive combined fleets to destroy the entity, but victory is now possible. The coalition that formed to fight Vorthak included species from across the galaxy. Old enemies put aside their conflicts to face the common threat. New alliances were forged based on the example of Jake Morrison, who had traveled alone into the heart of darkness to save people he had never met. The war against Vorthak lasted 3 years and cost millions of lives, but it was a war that could be won. The entity fought with desperate fury, but without its godlike power, it could not stand against the combined might of the galaxy. When Vorthak finally fell, its death scream could be heard across a dozen star systems. In the aftermath, humanity found itself elevated to a position of respect among galactic civilizations. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive, newcomers were now recognized as possessing something unique and valuable. Humans had the ability to face impossible odds without surrender and find solutions that seemed crazy until they worked. Jake Morrison's name became legend among every species in the galaxy. Statues were built in his honor on worlds he had never seen. Songs were sung about his journey in languages he had never heard. Children of dozens of species grew up hearing stories about the human who fought an alien god and won. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy approached seemingly impossible challenges. When faced with overwhelming odds, species across the stars began to ask themselves a simple question: what would a human do? The answer, more often than not, led them to find solutions that had seemed impossible before. The human who fought the alien god had died to save the galaxy, but in doing so, he had given birth to something even more powerful than any weapon or technology. He had given the galaxy hope itself and the knowledge that no enemy was too strong to defeat if good beings were willing to sacrifice everything to stop evil from winning. Jake Morrison had started his mission as one man with a damaged ship flying into certain death. He ended it as the hero who proved that even gods could fall if someone was brave enough to make them bleed.